Over the months that followed, the attacks continued with staggering regularity. Ramirez targeted couples in their homes, primarily in the greater Los Angeles area. He would break in at night, execute the male partner, assault the female partner, and then draw or leave religious symbols at the scene: pentagrams, inverted crosses, imagery connected to satanic iconography. In total, investigators would link him to at least 5 more murders involving couples, with additional assaults in between. The death toll was climbing into the double digits. Los Angeles was terrified. Hardware stores reported a surge in deadbolt sales. Neighborhood watch groups formed overnight. People who had never locked their windows started locking them. The feeling across both Los Angeles and San Francisco was something that residents who lived through it described the same way: a cold, ambient dread that settled into daily life. You couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside your window might not be empty. The media had been tracking the attacks for months by this point, and as the story grew larger, it needed a name. They called him the Night Stalker, which objectively is a far more dramatic name than this individual deserved, but it stuck, and it spread, and within weeks it was on every television screen and front page from California to New York. Meanwhile, law enforcement was working with what they had: witness descriptions, fingerprint fragments, and something unusual: a very distinctive shoe print found at multiple crime scenes. A brand of sneakers so obscure that investigators were able to determine that only one pair in Ramirez's size had been sold in the entire Los Angeles area. They were getting closer. But closer wasn't caught yet, and Ramirez kept moving. Stay with me, because the way this man was finally identified and brought down is one of the most unexpected stories in American criminal history. The technology that cracked the case barely existed, and his capture, it didn't involve a SWAT team. It involved regular people with a fence post. We're getting there. In the summer of 1985, something happened that Ramirez did not anticipate. San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein called a press conference. Standing before cameras and a packed room of reporters, Feinstein did something that was meant to reassure the public, but ended up doing something else entirely. She revealed publicly that police had identified the Night Stalker's shoe from the prints left at crime scenes. She held up a police sketch. She gave details about the investigation that, in hindsight, she probably should have kept closer to her chest. Ramirez was watching. He saw the press conference on television. He saw the sketch, he heard about the shoes, and he reacted immediately. He drove to the Golden Gate Bridge, stood at the railing, and threw his sneakers over the edge and into the water below. No shoes, no shoe prints. Problem solved then. With the audacity that had defined his entire criminal life, he didn't flee the state. He moved back to Los Angeles and kept going. In one of his final attacks, after assaulting a woman in her home, he looked her in the eyes before leaving and said words she would later repeat to investigators verbatim: "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." That woman survived, and that statement, combined with her physical description of Ramirez, became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Then came the car. Ramirez had stolen a vehicle during one of his crimes and, in an almost incomprehensible act of carelessness, left behind a single fingerprint inside it. A full identifiable fingerprint. Investigators ran it through a newly implemented computerized fingerprint database technology that had only recently become available to California law enforcement. The system found a match: a prior arrest for auto theft. The Night Stalker had a name. If you've been watching this far and you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. This is exactly the kind of content we bring you every single week. Richard Ramirez, 25 years old, El Paso, Texas. Police now had more than a sketch. They had a mugshot, a real photograph of the man who had terrorized California for over a year. They held a press conference. They released the image to every television station, every newspaper, every wire service in the country. Within hours, Richard Ramirez's face was everywhere: on the evening news, on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, on televisions in diners and barber shops and living rooms from San Diego to Sacramento. Every person in California who watched the news that night went to sleep with that face burned into their memory, including, as it turned out, the people who worked at a convenience store in East Los Angeles. 2 days after the press conference, Ramirez walked in. He was probably buying junk food, old habits. But the moment he stepped up to the counter, some clicked for the person behind the register. That face. Word moved fast. Ramirez noticed people staring, noticed the shift in the room. He ran. Richard Ramirez, the man who had broken into dozens of homes, murdered 13 people, and eluded one of the largest manhunts in California history, was about to be taken down by a neighborhood in East Los Angeles on a Saturday morning. He bolted out of the convenience store and spotted a car. He tried to steal it. People on the street recognized him and started shouting. He abandoned the car and ran. More people joined the chase. He tried to grab another woman's keys to steal her vehicle. Her husband stepped in and cracked Ramirez over the head with a fence post. Ramirez kept running, wounded now, bleeding, increasingly desperate. By the time he was finally cornered, 10 civilians had joined the chase. They took him to the ground. And then, given everything this man had done to their city, their neighbors, their sense of safety, they made sure he understood that the neighborhood had caught him before the police did. When officers arrived, Ramirez was on the ground, battered and in custody. Los Angeles exhaled. The formal charges came shortly after: 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries. He went to trial. He sat in that courtroom with the same flat, unsettling calm he'd carried through every crime scene. He made statements to the media. He flashed a pentagram drawn on his palm for photographers. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to death in California's gas chamber. Richard Ramirez smiled. Here is where the story takes one final, deeply strange turn. While Richard Ramirez sat on death row at San Quentin State Prison, something happened that no one who had followed this case closely could quite process. He got fan mail, a lot of it. Women and men wrote to him, visited him, sent photographs, declared their admiration. The phenomenon even has a name in criminology: hybristophilia, an attraction to people who have committed violent crimes. It's more common than most people want to believe, and Richard Ramirez became one of its most documented examples. Among his admirers was a woman named Doreen Leah. She wrote him dozens of letters. She visited him in prison for years, and in 1996, 11 years after his arrest, they were married inside San Quentin. Richard Ramirez, serial killer, convicted on 13 counts of murder, found someone who wanted to spend her life with him. The man with rotting teeth who terrorized 2 cities died not by gas chamber, but of complications from B-cell lymphoma in June 2013. He was 53 years old. California's death penalty in his case was never carried out. The Night Stalker case leaves behind more than a body count and a mugshot. It leaves behind a question that true crime forces us to sit with, whether we want to or not. What do we do with the fact that evil can wear a human face, and that some people, when they see that face, don't run from it? 13 families lost someone. Dozens of survivors carried wounds visible and invisible for the rest of their lives. And Richard Ramirez spent his final years receiving love letters. If this story stayed with you, and I think it did, drop a comment below. Tell me what part hit hardest. And if you want to know what time it is or what the weather's like where you are right now, drop that too. This community shows up from everywhere, and I love knowing who's here. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this video with someone who loves true crime. And I'll see you in the next case. She pulled into her driveway just after dark. It had been a long day. She was tired. She just wanted to get inside, lock the door, and forget about the rest of the world. She stepped out of her car, walked toward her garage, and that's when the door creaked open from the inside. A figure stepped out of the darkness. She never made it through her front door. This is the story of a man who didn't just terrorize a neighborhood, he paralyzed 2 entire American cities simultaneously. A man who left religious symbols scrawled on the walls of his crime scenes. A man so brazen he once looked a survivor in the eyes and said, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." He killed at least 13 people. He operated for over a year without being caught. And in the end, it was a single fingerprint and an angry neighborhood that finally brought him down. This is the true story of Richard Ramirez. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Daily Crime Case. We cover real stories, real victims, and real investigations. No fluff, no filler. If that's your kind of channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because we drop new cases every week and you do not want to miss what's coming. Now let's set the scene. The year is 1984. Los Angeles, California, one of the most glamorous, sprawling, sun-soaked cities in the United States. And quietly, underneath all that glitter, something is very, very wrong. People are being murdered in their homes at night. Couples, elderly women, random strangers sitting alone in parking lots. The attacks seem random, different neighborhoods, different victim types, different methods. Police are struggling to connect the dots. But the dots are connected. There is one man behind all of it. And to understand how someone becomes the Night Stalker, none of the most feared serial killers in American history, you have to go back to the very beginning, back to a small Texas town, back to a 12-year-old boy, and back to a cousin who should never have said a single word. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas in 1960. By most accounts, his early childhood was unremarkable. He was quiet, kept to himself. Nothing about him stood out. Until he was 12 years old. That's when his older cousin, a Vietnam War veteran named Mike, sat him down and started talking. Now, a lot of veterans come home carrying trauma they can barely speak about. Mike was not that kind of veteran. Mike wanted to talk, in detail, about the things he had done overseas, the people he had killed, the women he had brutalized. Stories so dark, so grotesque, that most people, especially a 12-year-old kid, would have nightmares for months. But here's the thing about Ricardo. He wasn't horrified. He was fascinated. And then Mike did something that crossed every line imaginable. He pulled out Polaroid photographs, crime scene-style images of his victims, brutal, graphic, undeniable proof of what he was describing. Ricardo stared at those photos and felt something shift inside him. Psychologists who later studied Ramirez's case pointed to this moment as a critical turning point, a young, impressionable mind being conditioned to associate violence with excitement rather than horror. Whether you believe that fully explains what came next or not, what happened over the following months made one thing very clear. Something had broken inside Ricardo Ramirez that could not be fixed. About a year later, Ricardo was at Mike's place when an argument broke out between Mike and his wife. Voices raised, tension escalated, and then Mike pulled out a gun and shot his wife. Right there, in front of Ricardo. Ricardo was 13 years old, and again, he wasn't traumatized in the way you'd expect. He was transfixed. At what point does a person cross a line they can never come back from? That question is worth sitting with because Ricardo's life after that moment reads like a case study in slow-motion collapse. He started using drugs, particularly hallucinogens. He began committing petty crimes, shoplifting constantly. He dropped out of high school. He pulled deeper and deeper into a warped, obsessive version of religious belief that would later appear at his crime scenes. By the time he was 17, Ricardo Ramirez was already a different kind of dangerous. At 17, Ramirez landed a job at a Holiday Inn in El Paso. On the surface, just a regular kid working a regular hospitality job. But Ramirez wasn't using that job the way his employer intended. While guests slept, he moved through the hotel like a ghost. He learned the routines, found the access points, and began slipping into guest rooms to steal valuables, cash, jewelry, anything he could pocket. But theft alone wasn't enough anymore. He began making his way into rooms where guests' women, specifically, were sleeping. He attempted to assault multiple guests before he was finally caught. He was fired. Now, you might think getting caught would slow him down, create some self-awareness, maybe even some fear of consequences. It did not. Because what this period in Ramirez's life actually reveals is something investigators would later note in profile after profile. He was testing limits, measuring his own nerve, and each time he pushed further and got away with it, the limits moved. The Holiday Inn was just the rehearsal. The real show was still coming. At 22, Ramirez made a decision that a lot of people make when they want to escape their past. He moved. San Francisco, California. New city, fresh start, different story. Except Ramirez didn't actually want a new story. He just wanted a new location for the same one. He didn't find work. He didn't build a life. Instead, he holed up in cheap accommodations and spent the majority of his time consuming drugs, cocaine especially, and letting every last standard of personal care dissolve. He lived almost entirely on junk food and soda. He stopped brushing his teeth. By all accounts from people who encountered him during this period, the physical decay was extreme and impossible to miss. He was, by every measure, a man who had given up on being a person. But here's what's important and what's easy to miss when you look at this period of his life. Ramirez wasn't idle. He was escalating internally. The drug use wasn't numbing him, it was amplifying the darkness that had been building since he was 12 years old in El Paso, staring at those Polaroid photographs. He later told investigators he'd begun fantasizing about killing during this time, replaying scenarios. Planning. By 1984, after roughly 2 years of this lifestyle in San Francisco, Ricardo Ramirez made a decision. He was going to start murdering people. Hey, real quick, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments. I love seeing where this community is tuning in from. The first known victim was a 9-year-old girl in San Francisco. She had lost a dollar bill, just a single dollar, and was out in her neighborhood looking for it. Ramirez approached her, told her he knew where the dollar was, that he could show her. She followed him. What happened next in the basement of the hotel where Ramirez was living is something that the full weight of American law cannot adequately punish. She was assaulted and murdered. She was 9 years old. It is impossible to overstate how depraved this was. And it is also, in retrospect, a portrait of exactly who Richard Ramirez was, a predator who chose the most vulnerable targets he could find, exploited trust, and felt nothing. 3 months later, Ramirez relocated to Los Angeles, specifically Skid Row, one of the most impoverished, overlooked urban areas in the country. He rented a room in a cheap hotel and continued his drug spiral. And then one night, He stalked a 79-year-old woman who lived alone in a residential neighborhood. He broke into her home. He assaulted and murdered her. He stole her cash and jewelry, and he walked away. 9 months passed. Then he struck again, hiding in a woman's garage and waiting for her to arrive home. When she pulled in, he stepped out, shot her, and then entered the house where he found her roommate and shot her too. Less than an hour later, he was at a nearby park where he approached a woman sitting alone in her car, dragged her out, and killed her as well. 3 victims in a single night. 10 days after that, he broke into a home in the early hours of the morning and shot a man while he slept. When the man's wife woke up and tried to fight back, Ramirez shot her too. Then, in an act of calculated horror that would later define how investigators came to understand him, he took something from her before leaving, her eyes, placed them in a jewelry box, and carried them out of the house. That detail, more than almost any other in this case, tells you everything you need to know about how Richard Ramirez viewed human beings. They were trophies.